Welcome to the Wellness on Tap podcast with your host, Dr. Debs Eastwood.
And I want to talk with you about your fascination with neuroscience, amongst other things.
I believe in the next 100 years, the biggest focus is going to be on what we can do in our head to make life a better place. And especially as we're being bombarded with enormous changes from AI right now. And AI is the obsession. Understandably, it's going to change the world. We have, in fact, haven't got a clue what actually life is going to feel like in 10 years' time. But for me, the most exciting change is NI, natural intelligence.
Oh, I like that. Did you coin that?
I didn't coin that.
Oh, okay.
My professor friend from Sheffield coined that. But I've latched onto it.
Why not?
Because as important as AI is, the quality of life will only improve for us if we understand and pursue NI, natural intelligence. In fact, the people that are going to get the most out of AI will be developing their NI to keep up with it, because AI is developing far faster than we are.
Yeah.
So if we don't develop the critical thinking, the creativity, and so on, to communicate with AI, we're going to be at a loss. I used to think that AI was going to be this huge leveler, and everybody would be able to access this enormously powerful, intelligent piece of software. Now I'm realizing the people that are getting the most out of it are those with highly developed NI, natural intelligence.
Interesting. Okay. So it took observing that for a while.
Yeah. Now I see people studying and getting better and better and better at briefing AI to get even more out of it. To me, I'm using AI literally 10 times, maybe 15 times a day, because it saves me thinking so hard. I'm actually more creative, and my output is greater. So I can spend more time creating, and I allow the AI to do let's find the details, let's think of all the things I've forgotten, let's put it into a structure, let's communicate it in a powerful way. So my creativity has now got far greater output thanks to AI.
Yeah, I mean, I first started using AI to write things very procedural, SOPs, guidelines, things like that. And I gave it a really good sounding board. Well, a friend of mine, Colette, she built it for me, gave it a really good sounding board, and it views everything through the sounding board lens before it goes to Google.
Yeah.
So it was looking at transcripts from the podcast, the companies I work with, things I did like, things I didn't like, etc. So even when it was coming out with, clinical guidelines for what I do outside of the NHS, it was sounding like I was saying it most of the time. I'm getting a bit better at it now. I'm not up to the 10 or 15 times a day yet. I've clearly still got some work to do, but it's a great tool.
Well, I've just asked it, whilst I was waiting to join you, I've just asked it, what do I do? I'm 76. I don't feel 76. I've got what I believe is enormously important for mankind. And I feel that as a responsibility. I've not finished my job. So I am in the process of putting a younger board in place and getting younger people excited about what I'm doing. And I've found some amazing people who are keen to follow it on. But I was asking AI, to what extent should I be backing off? I feel great. I'm not on any medication. I'm healthy and reasonably fit and so on. I feel like I'm going to carry on definitely for another 20 years before I slow down. We'll see. And AI give me the most wonderful suggestions, all sorts of things I hadn't thought about.
Perfect.
To prepare. So that if something, if I go under a bus on the way home and not planning it, but if I did, I don't leave a mess. What do I do to avoid leaving a mess? Because the worst thing that could happen is my unfinished work never reaches the people who could benefit. So there's all sorts of considerations there. If, for instance, a very powerful, very wealthy organization took it over, yes, it would reach a lot of people, but probably the motive would be, let's see how much money we can make from this. This is changing people's lives. Wow, we can make hundreds of thousands from a small number of people. It's not what I want.
No, it's not what you're about at all, is it?
I don't mind them doing that. so long as we reach everyone. To me, the quality of life of the person I have to walk around in the street that's homeless, the lack of life I realize when I see or hear about someone who's just committed suicide. These are things we now know how to transform if we do the right things.
Yeah.
Whilst Big Pharma is controlling and monopolizing the whole issue of mental health, we've got no hope, because no one in the current Big Pharma industry that's enormous, and it does a lot of good, I'm not knocking it for that, but is anyone motivated to find cures? Is anyone motivated or incentivized to find natural solutions?
No.
So the whole issue around mental health is completely misunderstood. It's pitifully misunderstood. Yeah. We actually understand physical health quite a lot better. We kind of now have got it that if we eat properly and if we do proper exercise, we're actually going to become physically strong and resilient physically.
Yes.
When we talk about mental health, suddenly there's a complete shift. It's reversed. We assume mental health implies there's something wrong, and what do we do about it? What tablet do we take? What therapy do we need? But it needn't be like that, because in the same ways, if I go to the gym and I pump iron in my arm muscles every day for a year, I'm going to have big arm muscles. I'm going to have huge strength there. We can actually do exactly the same with our brain. So one of the misconceptions about our brain is that we assume there's a glass ceiling. We assume there's a glass ceiling. Whatever my intelligence is, that's the maximum. And probably what will happen during my life, things will happen so that I have a mental health issue. In other words, it will come down from that glass ceiling.
Because we get told that all the time, don't we? You're not clever enough to do that.
I'll be told at school I've got ADHD, or I've got maybe some dyslexic symptoms, or I'll have a bit of depression, or something will happen and I'll end up with anxiety or PTSD or bipolar or any one of these conditions, all of which take down that level of intelligence from that glass ceiling that we have there. That's all wrong.
Yeah.
We can go through that glass ceiling if we want. If I want more intelligence, we can make new connections. Maybe we didn't know a few years ago, but today we do know.
Yeah.
We now know how to create neuroplasticity. You know, neuroplasticity is, I think, the most exciting thing of the next decade, next century. Because neuroplasticity means I can become more intelligent, I can become more resilient, I can have more mental strength, more mental capacity, I can feel more on top of whatever life is throwing at me and whatever I want to be on top of in this life. And that's exciting.
It is
We've
very
never thought
exciting.
that. But you know, neuroplasticity was talked about at least 80 years ago. But it's only in the last few years people have started to realize we can actually use neuroplasticity. We can actually generate neuroplasticity. We can actually do something with our brain. So if I've got limitations, if I'm a child and I find learning difficult, if I find reading difficult, if I find concentration difficult, if my self-esteem is low, if I've got imposter syndrome, like many, many entrepreneurs have. So whatever it is that's holding me back, the assumption has been we have to learn to live with it. And that's wrong.
Isn't it wrong?
Totally wrong.
Totally wrong.
So that's my message to the world, Debbie, is I want people to start realizing mental health, just like physical health, is something we can do something about. So stop assuming you've got to put up with whatever your limitations are. And of course, the whole diagnosis process, it becomes rather like putting tattoos on people's forehead. You know, if someone has got a whole bunch of symptoms, what happens? Oh, they go to some specialist, and that specialist ticks the boxes of the symptoms and tattoos them across the head. Autistic, ADHD.
Big label.
So you wouldn't let me wear my shirt. Actually, that's not quite true. But the shirt I turned up is in his vast potential. And do you know that applies to almost everybody? Almost everybody has got vast potential. I'm starting a research study right now with children with Down syndrome. Are there some genetic things that probably can't change? Yes. But are there some other limitations that have been a consequence of their genetic condition that can be changed? Absolutely yes.
Yeah.
So whatever condition it is, I start with the assumption, if you've got a limitation, you've got vast potential. And we should start looking at each other like that. If nothing else comes out of this podcast, I'd like everyone to start looking at themselves and everyone else in a new light.
That would be very refreshing.
Oh, vast potential.
Yeah.
Instead of seeing all the limitations, we tend to categorize people by their limitations. Oh, she's very shy. Oh, he's very angry. Or she's not a very good driver. Or he's actually not very smart. He's a bit slow. We think of people like that. Wouldn't it be a massive change if we could start looking at people, oh, she's got fantastic potential. And that should start in school.
Yeah.
The problem...
Oh, there we go. Yeah. Whoa, education.
Well, what happens in education? I admire teachers. As you know, I've got a couple of schools which I'm very proud of, and I'm very proud of the teachers there. I'm very proud of the kids there. Very proud of the head teacher there. Very proud of the parents, because we're finding their potential. Most schools, the emphasis is on, let's label them as quickly as we can. This child's got ADHD, must have some medication. This child's struggling with reading. There's no longer any point in thinking about this child being exceptional.
Yeah, what a load of tosh.
And then you get to the real world, where many of the entrepreneurs that are changing the world had been told in their school, you're not going to make much of your life.
Yes.
I've heard that. Have you heard that story?
I was told I would get a job in a typing pool.
Wow. And then?
And then I went on to get a degree, a PhD, and become a medical doctor, and now a holistic healer and a podcast host.
Wow. So you're living proof of exactly what I'm saying. You should have been wearing at school that T-shirt, vast potential. In fact, I've got a hat that says vast potential. I'm going to leave it for you.
Oh, bless you. Thank you. I shall wear it with pride.
Because you have, and you've manifested that. But you imagine what would happen in the school system if those very children that are assumed to have limitations about which nothing can be done, if they are told, if they're looked at, and if it's assumed that they have vast potential, what happens? Everyone treats them differently.
Yeah.
Everyone supports the development of that potential, the nurturing of it.
Yeah.
What would happen? So it's actually more by luck than judgment if someone who's got, say, ADHD symptoms becomes a hugely successful entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. Because for every entrepreneur that succeeds, an awful lot more that could have succeeded ends up underachieving the whole of their lives. Some of them tragically end up in prison. Mm. So in the school system, at the moment, we're serving people wrong. The very ones that we're putting down with that permanent tattoo that means that no one expects any more of them, including themselves not expecting any more, they're the ones that actually could change the world, most likely to change the world with their creativity, with their brilliance, with their thinking outside the box, with their ability to solve problems quicker than anyone else, and so on. So if just by getting rid of this label ADHD, getting rid of the label dyslexia, getting rid of the label even autism, we need to rethink it, because the science around what causes those symptoms is far better understood today than it was when the labels were created.
True. Medical science, neuroscience has moved on leaps and bounds, hasn't it, in the past sort of 20, 30 years?
And the biggest change, I think, in the coming years is going to be our understanding of the human brain. So whilst AI might be taking over all of the repetitive tasks that we do today, making life far more efficient and far less boring for us, we can now focus on developing the potential in our own brains. Mm-hmm. And with a changing world, we need a changing brain to keep up with it and cope with it.
So how do people do that then? Because you've mentioned neuroplasticity. You said it's possible to bust through the glass ceiling. How?
Well, my journey started a long time ago. I got a daughter that was struggling with learning. She'd gone to great schools, had great teachers, And yet at the age of 16, she was still barely reading 3 and 4 letter words. Was she stupid? No. She could, and she does to this day, wrap me around her little finger. She's manipulative. Is that intelligence? Yeah, it jolly well is. But despite the best efforts of the teachers, despite her best efforts, the information just wasn't going in. Many of your listeners may not be old enough to realize that it wasn't many years ago we had modems communicating with our computers at 28 kilobytes per second. Now, I live in the country and I've got 900 megabytes per second. I mean, the difference is just astronomical.
Yeah.
It's thousands of times greater. But if you put a modern, powerful computer and linked it up to one of those old-fashioned 28K modems, you'd assume the computer was rubbish, slow. And that's what it is with some of these neurodiverse conditions, is that you can have a huge brain inside, but if the neurology to get information in and out isn't properly and fully developed, it's like having a great computer plugged into an old, very old, inefficient modem.
Yeah.
So when we look at people, when we look at children, let's assume that if they are not coming across as bright as we think they could be, it could well be because the neurology isn't fully developed. So to answer your question, how do you find people's potential? You've got to develop the in-out capabilities. So children that can't read, often they're very creative. Mm-hmm. Children with poor attention, often they're highly creative. To me, creativity is real intelligence. Yeah. Those children that can read easily and listen to lots, and they come to the exam and they put it all out, is that their intelligence that we're measuring? We're measuring their regurgitation. That's very different. Now, regurgitation is really useful, especially if you're an accountant or a lawyer or many, many professions. Regurgitation is great, but it's not creativity. Mm-mm. To me, real intelligence is the ability to make connections of the type that others don't typically make. That's creativity, thinking outside the box. Yeah. So how do we find this innate intelligence that nearly everybody has got? I doubt if hardly anybody has fully developed their intelligence. So some people will go to their grave not knowing they've got a huge amount of potential in their brain they've never drawn on. Isn't that annoying?
That's sad.
That's sad.
It's really sad.
It's sad. And for many, it means low self-esteem. For many, it means depression. For many, it means you can't get the jobs you want, you can't earn the money you want, and you haven't got the confidence that you'd like to have. And you watch others with greater confidence or greater ability or earning more money or having more fun or being better at sport. And in actual fact, inside me is the ability to do and have all of those things if I go about it. I'm still not answering your question. Debbie, I will get to it. I'm not trying to wind you up.
No, you're giving me context. You're giving the audience context.
And this is such an exciting topic. So if anyone's listening that's got a child that's struggling a little bit, or they themselves, or they've got a partner, or they've got family that are struggling a bit in anything to do with limitations that could be brain related, listen up, please. Because what's coming out now from neuroscience is huge hope. So let's start the journey. What are the things that reduce my mental capacity? There's 2 fundamental things that reduce my mental capacity.
Okay.
I'm going to start with the cerebellum. Now, the cerebellum is the bit at the back of the brain that kind of links the brain with the rest of the body. It's a massive junction box. Many who are medically trained were probably told that the cerebellum is just to coordinate the body, the limbs, and your balance together so you can move. Yeah, that is one role of it, but it does an awful lot more than that. What many don't know is that the cerebellum is only small. It's only 10% of the volume of the brain, but it's got 3/4 of all our brain cells. 3/4, 75%. It's hugely important. It's coordinating just about everything we do. So when I first started working on this 25 years ago, I went to my professor, amazing guy, Professor Nicholson, lives in Sheffield, and he was the only medic that would actually listen to me, because I'm not, as you know, I'm not medically qualified. And I went to him and I said, how can you change the cerebellum without drugs? I want to change it permanently, but I don't want to use drugs. And he said, well, no one's ever done that. I said, well, what's your hunches? And he gave me his hunches. And that was an incredible breakthrough.
I bet.
And countless times I've gone back to Professor Nicholson to thank him that my daughter is alive today, because those hunches he gave me where to start. Well, my daughter had attempted to take her life, and I decided I was going to sell my businesses because what I was doing wasn't worthwhile when I'd got one of my 4 children was struggling with just wanting to exist.
Yeah.
And so I sold my businesses, and that gave me good resource, time, money, initiative to spend on brain research. But I didn't know where to start. But Professor Nicholson gave me a clue. So I found, first of all, I found a medical director, an amazing guy who's become a friend for life. And I took on people who understood the brain. And Professor Nicholson told me it probably includes the vestibular organ, which is our balance organ. And it probably involves some form of challenge to the brain. I said, give me a clue. He said, I haven't got a clue. So I went off and, he did suggest exercise. He said, try different exercises. So I took on balance experts and physiotherapists and psychologists. And it wasn't long before we had hundreds of people working on this project. Giving children, we started with children, giving children exercises that exercised the vestibular system and particularly challenged the cerebellum. So they're simple exercises. They're ones you can do at home. What we quickly discovered was that everyone needed different things because different parts of the brain had developed to a different extent. So that's what makes us different. We wear different clothes, we make different decisions, and we do different things, and we like different things. Different parts of our brain have all developed differently. So a one-size-fits-all solution was never going to find the potential. So very quickly we realized we had to be looking at what type of stimulation, what degree of stimulation, how long to keep that stimulation going, and then what challenge to give it, how serious the challenge was, and so on. And so that was just the start point. It wasn't long before we realized, actually, if you challenge them like that, within days, their brain is starting to develop. So what was impossible or hard was becoming easier. And so we had to find a way of changing that challenge so it became appropriately still a challenge. Too little challenge, you ain't going to achieve anything. Too much challenge, you can make somebody nauseous or whatever, fall or whatever it was. So it had to be a very intelligent, totally personalized program. And we started this, and the results were stunning. We had ended up doing some clever stuff. I wanted to know how we could find out how the brain was responding to this. So we bought some very expensive equipment that was developed by NASA. Because
the best then?
Yes. Well, they discovered, listen to this, they discovered that sometimes astronauts, when they return to Earth, start seeing things upside down and writing upside down.
Really? I didn't know that.
Well, because it was the impact of gravitational pull on the vestibular system. So our balance organ, we don't think much about it, but it's actually steering everything we do. When we stand up, there's an enormous number of calculations going on how to make us stand up vertically. All of the instructions that go to our muscles in our spine and in our legs and so on. Hundreds of them, if not thousands of them, are all being influenced by what the vestibular system is doing. What we discovered was, what we were doing in the brain was we were increasing the ability of the brain to learn. So we were making it better at learning what we needed to learn.
Amazing.
So the cerebellum is what actually learns and develops all the skills and concepts that we have that make life easy, that makes things automatic. So to give some specific examples, those children that can't listen for long, it's because one of the processes that turns sound waves into thoughts we comprehend hasn't been fully developed yet. So we cruelly say sometimes, oh, I can see his cogs whirring. What we mean is those sound waves aren't instantly and intuitively turned into comprehended thoughts. They have to process it, probably somewhere in their thinking brain. So what's gone wrong there, and how do we put that right? The bit of the brain that creates processes, like turning sound waves into comprehended thought, is the cerebellum. And we start off, when we're babies, whenever we do anything for the first time, we think about it. When we learn to ride a bike, we think about it. We've watched others ride the bike, we know what to do, we're thinking about it, and we get on and we try and balance and we fall off and we scuff our knees, and boy, that hurts. I remember still to this day.
Yes.
So what's happening? The brain is thinking what to do, but your thinking brain is very slow compared to the rest of your brain. It's like 100,000 times, 100,000 times slower. So when I'm thinking to ride a bike, I've got to lean over. How far do I lean over? I've got to carry on pedaling. I've got to turn the handlebars a bit. Those are massive, complex calculations that would take hours, even for a PhD in maths, to do. And my brain is expected to do it. Well, actually, it can't, because I'm thinking and I'm falling off. It's only when the cerebellum has worked out, what am I thinking? What do I have to do with what's happening? And how do I adjust it? How do I turn it into a hardwired program that becomes a fully automatic process of riding a bike? It's only when the cerebellum has done that, taken all our thoughts, turn it into coding, find out what goes wrong, and puts in some routines, like debugging a computer program, just the same. And eventually, we can ride without anyone holding us and without us having to think. In fact, if I introduce thought, it's 100,000 times slower than the cortex where this process should be happening, and I fall off. The wonderful thing about what happens when the cerebellum learns something is that I never forget it. So I literally put my bike away for 30 years because I discovered cars. Then I discovered my belt was slipping out on the holes and I needed to get on my bike again. So 30 years after I stopped riding it, got the same old bike out, dusted it, pumped the tires up, put a bit of oil on on a few places, and I got on and I rode. What the cerebellum develops is lasting.
Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense.
So when you develop the cerebellum, you create lasting change in all of the things you can do. You're improving the very bit of the brain that creates the circuits that makes life easy. So whether it's being able to listen effortlessly without having to have an extra thinking process, whether it's reading naturally without having to stop your eyes jumping around so the words don't jump around, that's cerebellum. It's nothing to do with intelligence. And ironically, the greater the intelligence, the more likely it is that parts of the cerebellum will be underdeveloped and will have some form of limitations. So with Asperger's, it's often social skills. With autism, it can be any one of a combination of things. With dyslexia, it's often eye tracking or some other process that facilitates reading. For ADHD, it's often listening, and sometimes it's reading as well. So these limitations are all caused by incomplete, or I'd rather say delayed, development of the cerebellum.
So have you missed something out when you're growing up then?
Well, we've been talking so far about the one thing that limits our mental capacity. So let me just finish that bit off, and can I then answer your question, Deb? So if your cerebellum isn't completely developed, you end up with some basic skills that you're not a natural at. It could be social skills, it might be sporting skills, it might be speech, it might be getting your thoughts out, it can be reading, it can be any one of a whole range of things, all because the cerebellum hasn't finished its job, and that's nothing to do with how much intelligence is there. In fact, the more intelligence, the more likely you are to have one or two things that are not fully developed. But when something isn't fully developed, you still have to use a thinking process.
Yeah.
And that thinking process fills up the very bit of the brain, the only bit of the brain that we can access, which is our thinking brain. So the thinking brain is 100,000 times slower than our unconscious mind. And the other big problem is you can only get, at best, 7 things in your thinking brain before you're overloaded.
Oh, okay.
So the very capacity that we can access, the thinking brain, is suppressed when we've got underdeveloped key skills like reading, listening, social skills, balance and coordination, spatial awareness, or verbal fluency, any one of the things we need to make life easy. If they're underdeveloped, our mental capacity is reduced because our thinking brain has to help out, consciously helping out with some of those skills. So that reduces mental capacity.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So that's just one thing. And you asked the question, what's gone wrong? Why is the cerebellum delayed? Well, there's not enough research around this, so I'm going to give you my hypothesis, which seems to fit with all of the examples I study. Our brains, when we're conceived, when we're in the womb, the fetus, the brain of the fetus, is programmed to deal with what is likely to happen. If at any time the brain knows what's happening, it's relaxed. If at any time the brain doesn't know the outcome of a situation, it is anxious. If it's a serious situation that's potentially life-threatening, or if it doesn't know whether it's life-threatening or not, it assumes it is, then it's very anxious. So the creation, I call these situations traumas. Now, I apply the word trauma to far too many things, so stop me if I start to do that.
Okay.
But any situation where the brain can't predict the outcome is an adverse event. It's a trauma. When the brain doesn't know what's going to happen next, it assumes it's a serious situation and it goes into a trauma state.
Okay.
So, of course, you can have bad parents that get drunk, go on drugs, do all sorts of things during pregnancy, and many of those can end up creating a trauma situation because the brain is bombarded with either chemicals or doesn't know what's happening, and there's unpredictability there, and that creates a crisis in that fetus's brain. But that can happen also when the parents are wonderful and caring and nurturing. The mum can have a fall or have some other form of accident or have some terrible news, or she may get postnatal depression, or at birth there could be an emergency forceps or something. There's any one of 1,000 different things where the baby's brain doesn't know what's happening. It hasn't been programmed to deal with the outcome. Mm-hmm. And a few things seem to happen there. Is this making sense?
It's making perfect sense. It's putting up loads of questions in my mind, which is brilliant.
Oh, shall I shut up and wait?
No. It's because I want to know more. So I'm hoping you're going to answer it anyway.
Well, so this is what happens, I believe, and this is the hypothesis, and it seems to be borne out with subsequent events. When the baby's brain is facing a situation where it cannot predict the outcome, a few things happen. First of all, it knows it's in a high-risk situation. So it's dealing with risk. It's got a problem it's got to solve. It has to think outside the box because it hasn't been programmed. Its box in the brain hasn't been programmed with how to deal with this situation. So it has to start thinking outside the box. Very often, it will reprioritize the development of the cerebellum so that whatever it needs right now for its survival is prioritized.
Right.
Which might mean it deprioritizes, if that's a word, those other things that it feels is less important for now, which is why about 25% of people have underdevelopment of their fine motor skills. Oh, they're not important now. How you hold your pen, whether your eyes can move smoothly when you try to read. That's not important for now. That'll be important in a few years' time. It deprioritizes it.
Right.
But it prioritizes something else. So you get this eccentricity in the development of the cerebellum, which ends up with a bit of an eccentricity in life, where folk can be really good at some things, but actually not very good at all and not a natural at other things. And how often does that apply in genius, where you get someone who's a genius at something, but some other things, they're not a natural. And I've got a friend, he was an amazing professor of chemistry, But if he came outside from his university to his car and he'd got a puncture, he hadn't got a clue. He could write research papers that inspired countless other chemists and researchers around the world with his brilliance. But he couldn't change the tire on the car, which my 13-year-old grandson could do effortlessly.
Yeah.
So you've got distortion of the development of the cerebellum, which creates genius and it creates limitations because of that reprioritization. The genius is really important because often we don't understand why folk are genius. We tend to focus on the other things. But let me go back to the very genesis of this. This was a baby, maybe even a fetus or a baby or a young child that was having to think outside the box, was facing a highly risky situation and survived it, was having to solve a problem, was having to act quickly and impatiently. What are the characteristics that mark ADHD?
Interesting.
And when you analyze, let's call it VAST, shall we? Let's not say ADHD ever again. The people with vast potential that are sadly, and I believe completely wrongly, labeled as attention deficit hyperactive disorders. These are the ones that can think outside the box. They're creative. These are the ones that can solve problems that other people can't because they've had to. These are folk that can take risks because they've become comfortable at taking risks because they were in a dreadful situation as a very young infant or fetus even, taking a risk, and they have to be impatient to getting things done because their survival was at stake when this happened. So the very genesis of the things that we label, I believe wrongly, ADHD, should be labeled VAST, because this is someone, albeit that they have a few things that they're not yet a natural at, but they have other gifts and strengths that when they get into later life often become vital assets for them.
Interesting.
So when that happens, and the final thing, of course, it does is creates triggers, what we call the root of PTSD. Those adverse situations means that whenever there's any connection in later life with the circumstances, the senses you were experiencing when that event happens, they become a trigger. It doesn't tell us in our thinking brain, but in our unconscious mind. So if a friend of mine, she was tragically abused by her uncle when between the ages of 3 and 5 in the garden shed. Until well into her 40s, every time she smelt wood preservative, she had a panic attack. Her thinking brain didn't know why. Her unconscious mind was saying, when you smelt this before, you were scared, you were ashamed, you were frightened. It was someone that should be loving you, doing funny things to you, and you didn't know what was happening. It was a scary existential worry you had at that time. So the brain connects in the unconscious mind those senses, and when it was an existential combination, later on in your life, you get put into a panic attack or into hypervigilance, or you have a phobia, and it links right back to that. So the propensity to have PTSD later on in your life often starts, not always, but very often starts very young. So to answer your question, very often the thing that distorts the development of the cerebellum is actually some adverse experience that distorts the development of the cerebellum, creates genius, and creates the propensity for having high levels of anxiety later on in your life. And of course, when you have anxiety, your brain floods with cortisol.
Yes.
And guess what? It reduces your mental capacity. So just to sum up everything I've said so far, if your cerebellum is underdeveloped, you end up with incompletely developed processes that require conscious compensation, that rob you of mental capacity in your thinking brain. If you have triggers that cause anxiety, your brain creates cortisol to cope with it, and that reduces your capacity. So the answer to increasing mental capacity is deal with both of those things, and you end up with a lot more mental capacity. You end up not just with more skills, but feeling more on top of life.
Makes a lot of sense.
So to me, in case I forget later, confidence is more easily explained neurologically than it is psychologically. So confidence is a direct inverse of the amount of how much mental capacity you're using. In other words, the less your brain needs to use your thinking brain, the higher your confidence, the higher your self-esteem.
Yeah, putting it in that context, it makes complete sense. And if I can borrow your analogy for a second, you've heard this before because we've talked about this before, but with particular reference to riding a bicycle, I can get on a push bike. I don't like it. But I can get on one and I can set off and I can pedal. My thinking brain, using your language, kicks in when I come to try and stop the bike and get off. I know how to do it. I've seen thousands of people doing it during my life, but I really struggle with that part. But yet, I went off and learnt a new skill of how to fly an aeroplane. So I can't ride a bike, but I can fly a plane.
Well, there could be one of two things with your limitations on riding a bike. It might be something in the cerebellum, but I doubt that. I actually think it's more likely to be that you've got some trigger, some event that happened once when you were stopping a bike, which perhaps ended up with you being hurt, and that's left a trigger. So whenever your brain, your unconscious mind, sees that parallel, sees a similarity with the senses that it was experiencing when you had some form of accident or mishap before, and it floods your brain with cortisol so it can't actually operate.
Do you know, I think you've just answered that. It wasn't me. It was my little brother, and I was out being responsible for him. And I thought I could hold the bike that he was on, and it ran away with me, literally. And so the bike ended up with him on it, metaphorically. Oh, sorry, bye. And he ended up crashing. Maybe that's it. He didn't really, there wasn't a big accident, he didn't really hurt himself, but he was clearly narcs with me, quite rightly. And he was a bit hurt, but, bumps and bruises.
So why don't we use that as an example of how do we correct that? What can we do to correct that?
Yes, please.
So the process, there's two things we've got to do. One, we've got to develop the cerebellum so that it can naturally give us natural skills and processes that makes life easier, and so that it naturally frees up the thinking brain space and puts us actually closer to a meditative state, which is a real bonus. So that's one thing. But the second thing we've got to do is how do we get rid of those triggers, those memories that have been saved in the brain where something very bad went wrong that now causes this massive amplification of the problem. So when you're going to get off a bike, it's not really serious. You know how to do it, but something amplifies the seriousness of the risk, totally distorts it. That's the trigger that happened probably when you watched your brother struggle. So we got to get rid of those triggers as well, those connections. Let's start with the cerebellum first, because that's where I started in my research. What we discovered was that if you give the right amount of stimulation to the correct part of the vestibular, you kind of start the creation of plasticity in the brain. Now, when I started this, I was convinced that you couldn't really create plasticity beyond about 16. And then, of course, people in their 20s would come and say, "Look, I've got these issues. Can you let me have a go?" Okay. And sure enough, it worked. And then people in their 30s, then people in their 40s. And once there'd been a lot of television coverage, and I was having to give a talk down in Southampton, and it was a packed room, but there was a lady on the second row, looked a very old lady. She never took her eyes off me, and she rushed up to talk to me as soon as I'd finished. And she said, "I'm 82. I want to read and write before I die. Can you help me?"
Oh, bless her.
And I said, "Look, this is an exercise program." And she said, "Let me stop you there. I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, it's going to hurt me if I fall. And I'm going to tell you, I am hurt more every day than ever your program could hurt me because I can't do the things that everybody else finds easy. She said, I've been in mental institutions. I've been locked up because I can't do some basic things. Can I do your program?
Wow.
What can you say to that?
You've got to say, yeah.
So I said, yeah, you can, but don't blame me if you fall.
Yeah.
And 4 months later, she was on British breakfast television holding up the first letter she'd written in her life.
Oh, my God. That is beautiful.
Now, I got a phone call 2 years later, and it was a lady saying, look, you've just put my son through the program. He'd got autistic symptoms, and he's doing an awful lot better. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm very blessed to have a lot of those calls, and it's thrilling when they come. But then she went on, she said, do you remember Liz Percy? I said, yes, she was 82. She said she's 84 and reading and writing in 3 languages. I realized at that moment that we are never too old to create neuroplasticity. We are never too old to create fundamental change in the brain. So I took the brakes off. Then I said, okay, whatever age you are, as long as you can do these exercises, you can do them.
Perfect.
So the exercises stimulate the cerebellum, gets the cerebellum working better. In fact, there's some research now in Nature, came out a few years ago, showing the very combination of exercises that I use, the combination of the stimulation to the vestibular, to the balance organ, and the challenge to the cerebellum. It only takes 10 minutes, 10 minutes a day for about 90 days. It's not a big commitment, but you combine those 2 exercises and you do it intelligently. In other words, you know which exercise to put with which exercise, you know how much stimulation to give and so on. So that's, and how quickly to progress it. Mm-hmm. Get all that right, and the density of grey matter increases. And what Nature said, which shocked me, was that you multiply the stem cells in the cerebellum and the hippocampus, the 2 major junction boxes of the brain. So, people pay fortunes to have stem cells injected here or there on their body because it's so valuable and makes such a difference. You imagine if you can create stem cells in the most important parts of your brain that transforms it, and that's what we're doing. That was a huge shock. The universe has to be involved in this. I can't take credit for this. I'm just a pawn in and being told what to do. It feels like someone's putting stepping stones down. My professor friend in Sheffield has A, got me going in the right direction many times, and B, stopped me going in the wrong direction many times.
Yes.
So I've got him to thank. But all of these things are now possible if we want to unlock the potential in our brain. So that's the cerebellum bit.
Yeah.
Do you want me to talk a little bit about how we get rid of these triggers? Well, during COVID, I realized there was an explosion in anxiety. I'm not going into the politics of what was happening behind the scene, if you'll forgive me, but I just want to focus on the fact there is a problem.
Yes.
I don't want to understand the problem. I want to solve the problem. And I started studying the various interventions. Well, there's CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's very common, and it does a bit of good for some people. The research around it, how strong it is and how lasting the results are, I don't think is very clever at all. But I came across a few other things that operate in the unconscious mind. And that kind of resonated with me, because the problem for most people with anxiety is not their thinking brain, is what happens in the background, what happens in their unconscious mind. That's where the problem seems to be. So hypnotherapy I got quite excited about, and I got even more excited about EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, because that was giving consistently pretty good results. So I went to my professor friend and I said, look, I want to try something mad. I want to try EMDR when someone's got a very neuroplastic brain. In other words, the brain has got all of the raw materials, all the stem cells, all the ingredients, and the motivation to change. EMDR could well push it in the right direction, and EMDR might even work better. I said, can you check out, is there any reason why I shouldn't try that? And he very kindly came back to me and he said, I think it's a very good idea.
Excellent.
Give it a go. So we did. And we started to see some remarkable results where EMDR was working generally much quicker, giving deeper results when neuroplasticity was high. In other words, when they were doing the very program that develops the cerebellum, they were creating plasticity. And within 10 or 12 days, they'd got enough extra plasticity for EMDR to become even more powerful and even more effective. So I am working now with war veterans and lots of others, showing that sometimes EMDR isn't quite powerful enough to get rid of the serious symptoms. Well, if you combine it with neuroplasticity, it often is more than powerful enough to create the transformation.
Life-changing transformations.
Am I talking too much, Deb?
No.
I want now, for some reason, I want to share something else with you, a bit more neuroscience. And
Go for it.
It's about how these triggers create. If I'm a very anxious person, if I have any panic attacks, if I have any phobias, if I find myself hypervigilant and worked up, and if I might even be high-performing anxious, which means I'm hoping nobody else notices because I'm actually doing a lot of good things, but still scared to death underneath and hoping nobody sees. If you're any one of those, then this is what created those triggers that create anxiety. When you have one of those adverse experiences, whether it's in the womb, whether it's at childbirth, whether it's in early months of your life, or even later on in your life, if something happens where your brain can't predict the outcome and it's really worrying, it might even be existential, then whatever you're sensing at that time becomes linked to the seriousness of the outcome you didn't know at the time. It becomes a complicated alarm system.
Okay.
That gets wired up during your rapid eye movement sleep. So when you're asleep, eyes are closed, but your eyes are flicking backwards and forwards underneath. That's when your librarian is saying, hey, when you had this combination of senses, it was a serious situation, so I'm going to link it to an alarm system. In fact, I'm going to link it to an alarm system that's going to amplify the risk to make sure you pay attention to it.
Right.
I don't know what this number is, but it feels like it amplifies it 100-fold, so that however serious something is, suddenly feels like it's 100 times more serious than it actually is. So people, when they have panic attacks, often their friends will say, oh, don't be silly, it's not a problem. First, they can't hear you. Secondly, they can't process it. And thirdly, it doesn't make any difference. Their brain has been handed over to their reptilian brain and they're in survival mode. So please don't embarrass them. Just understand a different part of their brain has taken over and it's put them in survival mode. Yeah. The only thing they're interested in is survival. Their brain has been flooded with cortisol. You've just got to wait for that to subside before any of your sensible thoughts are going to get in.
Yeah.
Please understand them. Please understand them. This isn't a choice they've got. So that's what happens. If any of those senses, and in the case of my friend, it was the fact that the smell of wood preservative had been linked with that very worrying, very painful, very shameful situation. And so the brain doesn't tell the thinking brain, it's just in the unconscious mind you go into it. So all of that is created during your rapid eye movement sleep. Well, the process of EMDR is to get you in a safe situation. Often it's a therapist will do this, gets you in a safe situation, gets you just reflecting on, whilst you're in the safe situation, reflecting on the incident or the triggers that cause you to have that panic attack or whatever it is. And then you do rapid eye movement. And the therapist, or if you're doing it yourself on self-EMDR, the computer will show you how to make your eyes go backwards and forwards. And that activates the very librarian that created the trigger in the first place. But now you're in a safe situation. You do know the outcome of the situation. You are safe. So instead of now connecting it to the alarm with that 100-fold amplifier that distorts everything, it can now link it up to a regular memory where there is no alarm. There is no amplifier. And guess what? The triggers have gone. The amplifiers have gone. You're no longer anxious. You've still got the memory, and it might even be a shit happens memory, but you've still got the memory, but it hasn't got the amplifier and the distorter that creates the hypervigilance, that creates the panic attack, creates the phobias, that creates all of that horrible, disturbing stuff.
Yeah.
It's transformational. So the combination, and of course, when you get rid of the trigger, your brain doesn't flood with cortisol. So you don't have that reduction in mental capacity. Your brain can still function in the normal way.
So that's the magic then, the combination of the exercises that challenge your cerebellum and your vestibular system combined with EMDR.
Yeah. We still call it EMDR, although our version of EMDR, now we understand the neuroscience of what's happening. We've modified it a bit. And we've actually got AI driving it now. So, sometimes it's a therapist, and some people like and need that, and it's very good for them. Some people actually don't want a therapist because what they experienced was so shameful, so embarrassing. They actually don't want to talk about it, so they want an AI version. We've now got a very powerful AI version that does that as well. But you know what's critical, Deb? It's critical to have the high level of neuroplasticity. Yeah. So my therapists, when they're working with someone, if they haven't been doing the exercises for the last few days, they haven't got the neuroplasticity. The therapist knows immediately, because the speed and depth of change of response is very different. So the magic is in the combination of those two things.
And you've had great success.
So you imagine the implications for the world.
It's huge.
50% of days taken off in the workplace are because of mental health conditions. 50%. How many suicides happen? How many kids in school are self-harming because of mental health conditions? And our mental health resources, the wonderful people that are there, are just woefully inadequate. If we had 10 times as many child psychiatrists and child psychologists and therapists, if we had 10 times as many, it still wouldn't be enough to deal with the problem. You know, you hear of, I often hear of children in Coventry, where I'm from. I heard recently 4 years waiting list for an ADHD diagnosis. I could give them a vast diagnosis in about 10 minutes and find their potential. The same is true for depression. Those who want to go through EMDR, there's often a 3-year waiting list if you get a chance to even go on the list. You've got anxiety, you want a solution now.
Can't wait 3 years.
Not 3 days, 3 weeks, or even 3 hours. No. I want it now because the need is so urgent. Well, the possibility of this, it's scalable. The possibility of it reaching huge numbers is enormous. What's that going to do for the world? What's it going to do for people's mental health, their happiness, their confidence? Yeah.
But will the system let it in?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think the system has got to change, and I think the change is going to come from people in the street saying, I know this is available, I want it, and I want it now.
Yeah.
So, you know, my job has become create the systems, create the process, make it as available to as many as possible, do all the research, so eventually the authorities will get, oh, perhaps there is a better way. But the authorities are going to have to look outside the wonderful pharmaceutical companies there and all of their products, so critical for so many things. Well, when it comes to mental health, I believe, from what I now already know, 90% of mental health medications will become redundant within the next 10 years if we apply ourselves to this. 90%.
There's your problem, isn't it? Big Pharma don't want that.
Well,
the cynic in me goes, they're a money-making machine.
Yeah, but you know, look at how AI, as soon as people started to realize the power of AI, it goes viral. As soon as people realize the power of this to help improve and extend my mental health, my intelligence, my ability to feel on top, my happiness, my confidence, as soon as we realize that, won't it go viral?
I would love it to. I want it to.
Well, perhaps what this podcast is all about.
Maybe it is.
It's triggering the viral start. So if anyone's listening and knows of anybody who's got a limitation, please think of this.
Yeah.
Don't say stop taking your medication. I'm not saying that at all. But look at this as a way of building up mental strength, mental resilience, mental capacity, processing speed. Oh, My professor rang me last week, only a week ago. This is brand new news. You've not heard this.
Oh, go for it.
Many people haven't. Most people haven't heard this. He said, forever, it's been thought you can't change processing speed. He said, I've been analysing all your data, all the thousands that have done your program. And he said, I just took the people that had done your program for at least 75% of a normal program, which is only 90 days, 10 minutes a day for 90 days. And he said, I now have undisputable evidence that you are transforming processing speed.
That's amazing. So we're upgrading the modem then, aren't we?
We're upgrading everything. It's like having, the latest software for your phone. We upgrade it and all sorts of new things can happen. It's just like that. But it's happening, it's in a very real place within our own mind. It's difficult for people to get that concept because we've always assumed we have a glass ceiling. Yeah. But you imagine, now we can break through that glass ceiling. I'm not as thick as I thought I was. I'm not as slow as I thought I was. I'm not as unconfident as I thought I was. I'm not so bad at golf as I thought I was. I can actually head for a better place.
Which would be amazing. And that is the world I'm kind of straddling at the moment in terms of being a clinical doctor, but embracing holistic health and wanting the two systems to see each other.
Yeah.
And see where this potential to work together is, so that the clinical health can then focus on doing even better what it does so well.
Absolutely.
Because it doesn't have to put its resources into things that there are alternative methods for.
Well, if you look at
why is that not?
Well, you look at the traditional, conventional mental health system, they're doing a great job, but they're just so under-resourced.
Exactly.
And folk go back into rehab, they go back to having to take more medication for anxiety or depression or whatever, constantly, because it's not a cure. When you develop the cerebellum, when you get rid of the very triggers that cause anxiety and cause PTSD, you're creating lasting change. Yeah. It's a concept that people haven't got. So if any of your listeners please think about everybody you know of and say, have a look at this, because there might be hope when you thought there was none.
Absolutely. If we can get the masses and the ones with influence within those masses, because it needs both, I think. I think you've got to have the influencers, the movers and shakers, and you've got to have all the people that have been the resource and proven the theory.
Can I share with you a mad idea I've got?
Please do. I've
not told anybody this, but who are the influencers today? We've got, there's an awful lot of influencers on social media. There's folk who are very famous actors and musicians and so on, and sometimes famous sportsmen. These are the influencers. But there's another group, the entrepreneurs. Many entrepreneurs, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, many entrepreneurs go through life having been told at school they've got a few ADHD symptoms. Some of them are labeled ADHD, diagnosed, some aren't, but they go through life, and as I said earlier, a few end up in prison, sadly. Many end up underachieving, and some end up hyperachieving. And yet they often go through life with a bit of imposter syndrome. Is this a fluke? Do I really... I had this. I remember wondering, is this a fluke? So I ended up making another business. Oh, and that went well as well. Then another bit. Oh, that went well as well. And so eventually my imposter syndrome did fade a bit. But many go through life with imposter syndrome. Do you think we could somehow reach entrepreneurs who are having success with a nice business in their town or city or area and say, look, I want you to inspire all the children in your region, in your town, in your city that have got your symptoms, and show them and get them to sponsor these children to say, I don't want it to remain just luck or fate whether you succeed or not. I want to find your potential. You've got these symptoms just like I did, and I want to sponsor you. So I just, if anybody's got any ideas about how we can reach entrepreneurs and inspire them, not only will it get rid of their imposter syndrome and maybe get rid of some limitations. Some of them never read. They get someone else to read the long contracts because it's hard for them. Yeah. Sometimes they jump from shiny thing to shiny thing and they can't settle down. Sometimes it affects their relationships. But whatever it is, it's going to make a positive impact on their life. But if they could, A, see the benefits for themselves, and then B, inspire the next generation. I just think there's something there, and I don't know how to get there. So if anybody's got any ideas, please.
There's somebody that's sprung to mind that I am actually going to be talking to in a couple of weeks.
Because that's how I think we can get influencers to make a difference to the next generation. Most entrepreneurs actually want to put back. And if you can put back in something that's precious to me because I suffered it, if I can help those children and instead of 1 out of 10 becoming hugely successful, make it 10 out of 10 become hugely successful. Yeah. And if I can do that as an entrepreneur, isn't that well worthwhile? So I'm hoping I get some feedback from your listeners, Deb, that will give me clues about how I can get that there. I would love to do it.
That would be amazing.
That could go viral. Do you remember the ice bucket challenge?
Yes, oh gracious, yeah.
Well, you imagine if we could create similar, the entrepreneur challenge.
Yeah.
How many lives in your neighborhood, in your community, could you transform?
That gives me the best kind of chills. Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for coming and sharing with me. I've just really enjoyed digging deeper into what's going on in the world of neuroscience and the way we can use it to help people.
Can I finish with one thought? I'll just tell you about my latest research.
Please do.
This is my latest research. I've not told anybody about this. There's different types of pain. And there's some types of pain that are linked to trauma, fibromyalgia, period pains, often the difficulties going through menopause and so on. There's a whole series of pains that are linked to trauma. So this is very early stage research. I'm not claiming anything yet, but I want to, because what I'm finding is the reduction, say, in period pains, when you deal with the triggers that caused the trauma in the first place, the reduction in period pains appears to be very remarkable. Sample size is small right now, so I'm just going to give some hope for those that have got fibromyalgia. My own son had fibromyalgia, terrible pain for 20 years. The only thing that got rid of 95% of it was when he used EMDR, when he got high levels of plasticity to deal with the original traumas. So I'm just planting a seed there. If anybody wants to work with me on research on that, then I will share with them exactly what the process I'm using. So I just want to, I'm not promising. I refuse to overpromise, but I'm just saying there's some hope out there for certain types of pain that have got clear links to trauma at some point in the past. So there's the future.
Fabulous. Fabulous. And you know you're going to have to come back and tell me about this when it's all wonderful and you've solved another amazing problem. Yeah.
Deb, thanks for what you're doing. Thanks for inviting me. I do appreciate it. You're so easy to chat to. I think I've talked a lot. If that's the case, I apologise to all your listeners.
That's the whole point of you being here. That's the whole point of you being here, for you to talk about what you're doing and for me to just be here as a guide.
Yeah, but I get joy listening to you because you've always got so much to share. And today I've not had that honour or privilege.
We can do that another time. Thank you, my lovely.
Thank you.